Okay. Hi. Welcome to Shabazi, Sranan and Ska, a podcast presentation by Jordan Parker-Ashe for 21M030 at MIT in spring 2021. Let's get started. In 2006, the Idan Raichel project took the world by storm, bursting onto the international pop scene with an eclectic and entrancing 12-song album signed by Kambansha Records. What started out as an experiment in producer Idan Raichel's basement soon skyrocketed to the top of Israeli charts, hitting triple platinum status and even supposedly nudging out Beyoncé. Where did Israel's biggest musical phenomena in recent hit memory come from? The first Idan Raichel project demo songs were released as early as 2002, with subsequent compilation and international releases in 2005, 2006, 2009, and 2013. Although the project went on hiatus in 2014, the lasting imprint it left is unmistakable. From the very beginning, the imperative was to bring different musical cultures to the stage as equals. The project has come to symbolize a musical melting pot, reflective of Israel's enormous population of immigrants from around the world. As such, over 95 unique artists aged 16 to 91 participated in the album before its hiatus. Each collaborator brought new instruments, vocals, mixing styles, and flavors to the tracks. Cultures transplanted to Israel are particularly prominent in the album, reflective of successive themes of diaspora, migration, exile, and home amongst Israel's melting pot of immigrants. Just a sampling of songs from the album reveals a rich mix of Yemeni chants, ancient Arabic poetry, Jewish liturgical passages, Ethiopian folk music, Caribbean rhythms, Latin beats, and other influences hailing from India, South Africa, Sudan, Morocco, Turkey, Portugal, and more. I'm going to focus on one of the Idan Raichel project's lesser-known songs, my personal favorite one. I was actually dragged along to an Idan Raichel project in 2013 when they were in the midst of their world tour and stopped at the JCC, the Jewish Community Center in a neighboring city to mine. That experience was transcendent to me. It changed my life. We bought a CD, and the project has been a soundtrack to my life for all the years since. By personal preference, Yom Shabat featured prominently. When I turned 16, my parents rented a limo for my friends and I to ride in. There were LED lights, fancy glassware, soft leather seats, and Idan Raichel blaring on the aux. Of course. What is so special about this one song? To me, one of the most entrancing aspects of the Idan Raichel project is the hearty dose of juxtaposition, especially of electronic music and ancient poetry. So, Yom Shabat was produced by Idan Raichel, and it features as track 8 on their internationally released album. Verses alternate between an unknown, uncredited vocalist who recites a 17th century poem by Salam al-Shabazi, anglicized Shalom Shabazi, and Sergio Braams, a Surinamian Israeli rapping in Sranan Tongo, a Creole invented by West African slaves. Topically related to the languages, I posted on lyricstranslate.com in 2017, asking for help translating the song. And actually, this past February, the artist himself, Sergio Braams, transcribed his verses into English characters for me. It was huge. The title of the song is Yom Shabat, literally, the day of Sabbath, and it starts out with ringing bells, announcing the celebration of Shabbat, an observance of rest, amongst other rituals. Let's begin.
Take a Shabbat, enough this, enough that. Take a rostu, soso Gado promoutu. You see? Omen I waka long, jompo fadong opo knapu sdong.
Yom Shabat, ashabe'ach,
The first artist you heard is Sergio Braams, speaking in Sranan Tongo to introduce the song. The second voice is uncredited, but it takes on a quality reminiscent of trope, a stylistic, heavily ornamented, melodic language used primarily in Jewish religious settings when chanting Torah. Instead of Torah, he is reciting a poem penned in 17th century Yemen by Rabbi Shalom Shabazi, the poet of Yemen, one of the greatest Yemeni poets to ever exist. His diwan, collection of poems, constitutes of around 550 in Arabic, Hebrew, and Aramaic. The vast majority of Shabazi's works center on themes of exile and redemption, politically charged expressions of the Yemenite Jewry's national and political ethos, which was a notable departure from prior Yemeni poetry styles. This is because Shabazi experienced one of the most traumatic periods of Yemeni history, illuminated by a backdrop of empire building and war. 100 years prior, the Ottoman Turks captured Yemen in the name of empire, intending to block the Portuguese from accessing the Red Sea, and by proxy, the Arabian Sea, fully aware of the lucrative sea lanes routing along Africa towards India. After the Ottomans became distracted by the Persians in Iraq, the surviving Zaydi dynasty fought viciously to restore Islamic dominion in Yemen after recapturing Sana'a in 1629. Their rule contrasted against the high degree of religious freedom afforded to minorities under the Ottoman millet system. During Shabazi's lifetime, the nationalistic Shia tensions grew oppressive as the reinstated Zaydi imamate implicated Yemeni Jews in a time of intense persecution, claiming, "There shall only be one religion in Arabia." This followed with several decades of increasingly severe discrimination, with the prohibition of wearing religious garments, the destruction of synagogues, forced conversion, and finally, culminating with exile in response to a wave of messianic ideology amongst the Jews. The exile of Maza took place in 1679, as Jews were forced from ancestral regions centering Sana'a to the coastal port of Maza with the intention of eventual deportation. Many died from overcrowding and disease, but they were permitted to return after several years due to the disruption of commerce. But the scars were far from healed. It is absolutely imperative to understand Shabazi's poetry in the context of the geopolitics of post-occupation Yemen and the sectarian culture of the ruling Zaydis. Shabazi's works are imbued with a sense of longing, excitement, and awe of the idyllic life in the land of Israel, as quoted by Yosef Tobi. He envisioned a world without suffering, imagining the peace, spirituality, innocence, and vitality of a home free from the oppressive caliphate rule, hearkening back to imagery of biblical times. The translated lyrics to the poem are as follows: "On Sabbath day I shall praise the living God of my salvation, and I shall make sacrifices of spices on the day of the return of my temple." It's fitting to note that Jewish poetry often uses religious themes as allegories. Spices references Havdalah, the time of rest and religious duties in the week for Jews, where a cup of spices is smelled as Shabbat ends. And sacrifice is a nod to the Second Temple in Jerusalem, the seat of Jewish culture and religious power before it was destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE. Shabazi utilized religious imagery to metaphorize concepts of autonomy, freedom, and wholeness in the context of longing for ancient times, the last time that Jews enjoyed an autonomous nation-state before the modern day. Essentially, this poem can be interpreted as a political statement of resistance and hope, as Shabazi looks to the glory of the past to take heart for a better future. In this song, it takes the uncredited singer almost 4 stanzas, separated by Sranan rap, to complete the 4-line poem, signifying the journey, the transitory nature of returning home. It is most fitting for the Idan Raichel project to sample this selection, using Shabazi's words of sacrifice, salvation, and return, quite literally embodying the ideals of diaspora, migration, and home, so prevalent in the album and in Israeli society as a whole. Let's hear Sergio. This section will last around a minute.
Gado, alla, wroko, sani, spang, nanga, nyang. Sata, Gado, wortu, dja'f, sa me kalasa, libis, mano, mang. Baby day, Gado, take fi make a grow tapu. 60 day, wroko, nanga, 1 day, rostu. Obo yo ay na look to sitak, alla, san, lotu. Among kenki, stairs, on planet, a hill, rota, protu. Krimu oso, ujari, uskiwa, wikilexo. Samo me siksiki we, kukite uno krimu reis, uno fulip leg base. Suma alisa yere, suma yere sapiri, suma firi sasabi, suma sabi gitanyi. Tang tanyi, gitanyi, gitang tanyi.
Okay, so the language you just heard is Sranan Tongo. Again, this is resonant to exile and forced migration. Sranan Tongo was developed as a lingua franca between Dutch colonial powers and West African slaves, becoming a pidgin language amongst foreign laborers imported by the Dutch. According to Dr. Cynthia Hallen, Sranan was actively persecuted as a language by colonial Dutch Surinamese who considered it illegitimate. They actively banned it from being used in higher education and government, and weaponized it as a demarcation of lower social class. It took until the 20th century for it to gain dominance and respect in Suriname, as well as in emigre communities in the Netherlands and the Netherlands Antilles. I reached out to the artist on Facebook, and he responded. He penned a translation to the lyrics to me on Facebook Messenger. I probably now own the first English translation of the song to ever exist. The lyrics resonate deeply with themes of gratitude and community, of resting and caring for oneself and others, in essence, Shabbat. A little about Sergio Braams, who worked closely with Idan Raichel to engineer the song. He was born in Curaçao, spent his teen years in the Netherlands, and now lives in Israel. As a consequence of growing up all over the world, Sergio is fluent in 7 languages. After performing with several reggae bands, he started his own band, Prana, where Idan Raichel started off his career as a keyboardist. Idan left and released his first album of the Idan Raichel project while Sergio was touring with another group. In Idan's first album, he included Brong Faya, an impromptu recording made in under 10 minutes of Sergio singing on a beat Idan made. The spontaneity of music production really awed me. This marked Sergio's entry into the project. For Idan's second album, he invited Mr. Braams back to sing on Yom Shabat, which already contained the Yemeni prayer and the beat at this point. Sergio said, Idan wanted me to sing straight on it, but I wanted to sit and write something, for the Shabbat, to me, has a profound meaning. So Idan went to sleep for 2 hours, and I added the lyrics for the rap and the guitar reggae chops. And this is a quote from me from our direct message convo on Facebook Messenger. Sergio continued to perform live for the project whenever he could until its hiatus. Mr. Braams, if you're listening, I'd like to thank you deeply for your time and generosity in corresponding with me, and for your musical work, which has touched many people's lives. I personally use Yom Shabat as my alarm clock every Friday and Saturday morning since high school to this day. Thank you. Let's now take a moment to finish the song. This will take about a minute. Focus on the instruments.
Oso, ujari, uskiwa, wikilexo. Samo mesiki we, kukite uno krimu reis, uno pulip lekes. Suma alisa yere, suma yere sapiri, suma firi sasabi, suma sabi gitanyi. Tang tanyi, gitanyi, gitang tanyi. 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 Sang tanyi, gitanyi, gitang tanyi. Tang tanyi, gitanyi, gitang tanyi.
Yom Shabat, ashabe'ach,
Did you notice the keyboard, the guitar, the synth? The pulsing Caribbean rhythm you notice in particular is called a ska stroke, a method of picking a guitar on the offbeats, staccato, emphasizing the traditionally weaker beats 2 and 4. It's a classic, unmistakable element of reggae, and it's deeply rooted in the musical traditions of the African diaspora and the ideologies of Pan-Africanism, Rastafari. In Reggae Rhythms in Dignity's Diaspora, Alvarez notes how reggae's rhetorical usage of socio-political commentary and roots in diaspora situate it as a medium for refracting political thought on globalization, cultural dialogue, and identity. Fittingly, it's applied in the song, incorporating yet another element speaking to the archetypal motifs of homeland and dispersion, autonomy and identity, diaspora, exile, migration, and the subsequent struggle and evolution of culture. The Idan Raichel project itself remains a masterfully interwoven tapestry of cultural color, reverberating within the musical and social landscapes of Israel's vast immigrant world. This song in particular embodies the kaleidoscopic nature of themes of transplantation and home through Yemeni poetry, Caribbean rhythm, and Sranan rap. Fittingly, Shabbat symbolizes new beginnings, and in Beyom Shabat, the heady mix of ancient tradition forms a mosaic with modern ambiance representing a hopeful world in which love, tolerance, and inclusivity can overcome Israel's diverse and often disparate multiculturalism through music. Thank you for listening. The spontaneity. I'm gonna edit this, guys. Don't worry. How do you say spontaneity?
Spontaneity.
Spontaneity.
Yes.